Hi everyone, today I am talking with Aleks the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, a regular guest. Aleks always comes on the show to shed some new light and love on training. Today we're going to be talking about waking up the glutes, the lumps and the bumps on your rumps. Well, the lumps and the bumps on your rump. Like you can't have more than one rump. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for listening to the Original Strength Podcast. Here is Mr. Aleks Salkin. Pull up a chair and buckle up. It's the Original Strength Podcast. So you were telling me about butts.
Yes. Anyway, somebody told me. I was explaining. I had written an article for Medium last year. I posted it on Medium, and I got like taken down immediately. I was trying to figure out, and it was on the topic of training your glutes, and I have a pretty tongue-in-cheek sense of humor. And one of the things that I put in there it was like a picture of some guy, I guess, at Walmart, and his pants were sagging to the point where you could see his butt, and it was very flat. And so Um, so anyway, I put something like, I don't know, I put something like "say no to crack," and again, it was a picture of somebody's butt, and I think that just went against their policy, and so it got taken down. And so somebody said, you know what, if you want to, you could probably instead put in a picture of a frog's butt, because frogs evidently have like they have butts that look like really funny. And so sure enough, I was scrolling Instagram the other day, and somebody had posted a picture of one, and it looked like just a really underdeveloped butt. It was really, really funny.
You know, now we're full circle.
Why are you looking it up?
No, so guys, if you're listening at home, we're just jumping in the middle of this conversation. But Aleks reached out to me and asked if I would enjoy an article for the Original Strength blog. And I asked him, is a frog's butt watertight? Which
I
means
forgot about that.
yes, it is. And so naturally, he started thinking about frogs' butts, which they have none. So he decided to write an article on glute training. Is that how that works?
There are a lot of self-conscious processes that evidently were going on unbeknownst to me, but that does indeed sound about right. I had totally forgotten that you even said that. That was like, you know,
Well, naturally, it took you a month to contemplate it.
Well, you know what? Actually, I had a different article in mind. I'll have to explain it to you after the show. But and then I decided, like, I was like, maybe I won't send them that one. Maybe I'll come up with a different one. And then it was like I had these different ideas rolling through my head. And then finally, I was like, oh, well, I should write something about glute training the OS way, because why not?
So, well, now that we're in this, so glute training the AOS way, I guess my first question is for listeners, glutes are important, right? But okay, so how can having strong glutes help a person?
Well, I think the first most important thing to keep in mind, as far as original strength is concerned, is thinking about what the goals are of original strength and what it is that original strength helps people to achieve. And it's essentially it's unlocking your body's natural ability to move, to be resilient, and to be able to perform like it's supposed to. I think one of the biggest problems that people in general face is that we're just too sedentary overall. And then we try to do stuff that requires, full body coordination, requires like a mind muscle connection, all of these different things. But I think the average adult in America sits for 6.5 hours a day, and the average teenager is like 8 hours a day. This is average. And that means that probably there's a huge percentage of people who sit even more than that. So then they try to jump right into, let's say, otherwise great like movements that I really like, like kettlebell movements and body weight movements and barbell type of training. But they don't even have a good, strong movement foundation. And we know that if you have this movement foundation down, a lot of these other things become much easier. So, all that to say, why should we train the glutes? The If there's any movement that sets human beings apart from all other creatures, it's our ability to walk upright, to run, to sprint, things like that. And glutes play a very important role in our posture. Like if you see anybody who is, let's say older, or maybe they've had a desk job for a very long time, they have a tendency to kind of slouch over or like hunch over at the hips. They have just kind of this very like old and decrepit type of movement. And the ability to activate, I wouldn't say activate, I'll say access and properly use your glutes is essential for any movement, whether it's baseline movement or higher level movement. And a big issue that people have is that we just, again, this mind muscle connection is something that we have largely lost nowadays because we don't need it as much anymore. And then when you do decide that you want to try to do something cool, like some strength training movement or some athletic movements, if you can't access the muscles that you need to be able to perform them safely, muscles in particular like the glutes, you're going to be in for a bad time. So it's a long answer to a short question, but I think that, again, as it pertains to our goals and original strength and with original strength, that is number one thing is lifelong performance and performance that is done ideally pain-free.
Yeah, and like so glutes to me are also like your power propelling muscles because they do like, we do walk on 2 feet, we do run on 2 feet, and they help propel us from one spot to another. But a lot of people want to get in shape and they don't run to the kettlebells or they don't run to the weight room, they run.
Mm-hmm.
Like so they go from being sedentary and sitting all the time, maybe totally not having glutes to deciding to run, needing glutes to propel them, and they jump into the activity that, well, they really don't have that propeller, so to speak.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting because you can always see the people who are like that because meaning the people who are go from like just seated to running because they're usually, again, they're hunched over at the hips. They're kind of falling forward and catching themselves. It's like you can hear them coming from a mile away, like their feet are slapping against the sidewalk. And these are often the people who end up with knee and hip and low back issues because the biggest, most powerful muscles in their body, the glutes, are not really doing what they're supposed to be doing. So everything else has to jump in and do the job of this powerhouse muscle group. And if only they had spent a little bit of time preparing prior to their running, they would likely not only run faster, more easily, but would do it more than likely with fewer issues in their joints.
So from an OS perspective, like how you wrote this article and you have some different methods for accessing the glutes or to turning the glutes back on so people have access to them.
Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite route to take for that? Like, does it depend on the person? Like, I mean, obviously start where they are, or do you like to do all of these movements for everybody?
Well, yeah. So in the article, I've got like just a whole battery of movements that I really like quite a bit. But without question, it really depends on the person. Because, like for instance, so the bird dog is high up on the list because you have to put one leg back behind you and you're putting that hip in extension. And so one of the jobs of the glutes is to extend the hips. So theoretically, that should be good enough to get them fired up and doing their job. But I can't tell you how many times I've tried to have someone do the bird dog, and what happens is that like their low back overextends, or they just don't completely extend the hip. So most often you can't just start off with like tossing all of these different movements at them. You've got to start them in a place where they can feel what their glutes are supposed to be doing. And you'd be amazed. Well, you might not be amazed. I'm sure you've experienced this, but a lot of people would be amazed at how much work it takes to get some people to be able to feel their glutes. And once they can do it, they can repeat it. But quite often, you'll put them into a position and you'll ask them, do you feel your glutes working? And they'll say no. They say, okay, reach back and touch them. Do they feel like they're contracted? Oh, yeah, they do. So, for instance, one of the things that I've done, and I include this in the article, is the prone partial lower body segmental roll. It is, the name itself will almost leave you out of breath, but when you actually try the movement itself, you're going to find, if you're not familiar with your glutes, or you haven't really, you haven't figured out how to access them, probably find it's going to be a little bit challenging as well. So one of the things I'll have people do is, in essence, if you're not familiar with this, it's like you're laying flat on your stomach and you reach one leg behind you, like across the body. And from there, you just want to hold it. I mean, you could keep reaching the leg until you roll over. That's perfectly fine. I mean, that's the ultimate finish for the movement. But the partial portion of it is important because that lets you stop right at the point where they can really feel their glutes contracting the most. And exactly where that's going to be is going to depend on the individual. But one of the things that I'll do is I'll have people do that. And then with their opposite hand, reach behind and touch their glute so they can kind of get that tactile feedback to see that it actually is starting to, to kick on, as it were. Repeat that on the other side. You do that for a few rounds. And then another great thing that I'll do is after that, I might give them a movement that requires their glutes to function. And it could be anything from push-ups, because again, a lot, you need to activate your glutes in the push-ups, at least to a certain degree. And many people don't, so they got their butts piked up in the air. It could be, deadlifts, it could be swings, it could be squats, but giving them the ability to actually make that mind-muscle connection with something very simple. The way I usually start is that prone, lower body, partial segmental roll. Okay, caught my breath. And then a little bit of tactile feedback with the other hand.
So I'm gonna go back to the bird dog real quick because you mentioned when you put people in the bird dog and they try to extend, they're getting extension from their back but not their glutes, and or they're not even aware that they have glutes. They don't feel on fire. So, like, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but sometimes when you see a person, and it's not across the board, but sometimes you see people that don't have glutes, no humps, no lumps, no bumps on their butt, right? But if you look up their back, they have like what would be glute humps on their back.
Yeah.
It's like their glutes have moved up from where they should be to a area that they should not be, but that seems to be where they're operating from, where they're getting their power or their extension or they're propelling from.
Yeah.
So, and I know in your article you talked about not having glutes or access to your glutes could lead to lower back pain. Do you think that's because the glutes have just moved up and they're trying to access everything from a higher up where they really don't need to?
Yeah, well, not being a physical therapist or an anatomist or anything like that, I could speculate. And my assumption would be yes. And actually, I remember back in like 2017, and you were there, so you probably remember this too. This was the OS Pro workshop in Monterey, California. Dan Barrows was talking about that, master OS instructor. And one of the things that he was talking about was working with, I don't remember. I mean, there were I think field laborers or something like that, like people who had worked in any number of different fields over a long period of time, and so many of them they couldn't hinge at all. They never hinged, and what they would do instead is they would kind of bend over, like you're describing, at the low back, and so they had a very, very well developed lower back muscles, and but absolutely could not hinge at the hips, and I think he said what he would do is we would have them rock and maybe do some resisted rocking so they could kind of start to feel that. I think it's great to have a very well developed low back, but it's only really going to look good if your glutes are even more well developed. And without question, I mean, you ask anybody to pick something up off the floor, they're just going to completely, fold over. It's not the end of the world, but if they try to do that with something heavy, the likely outcome is going to be not very pretty. So yeah, 100%. I mean, to me, that sounds like that's like the obvious next step is that people will either just completely bend over like that, or maybe, they'll do some sort of a half-hearted squat, to pick things up, but they're not really getting access to the glutes the way that they're supposed to. They're kind of just bypassing it. And then that's where, a whole host of other issues tend to pop up.
So you start a person on the ground, or you really like the lower body segmental roll from the belly to access the glutes. And another movement you mentioned though was marching.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming that's after we've done some rolling and have access to the glutes. But so marching is, well, it's almost like exaggerated walking. So how does marching tap into glutes better for you, better than walking would?
One of the things that I really like about marching is, like you said, it's exaggerated walking, and it has to be done very deliberately. Like you can see people walk without using their arms, just kind of slumped over and falling forward. You really can't do that all that well with marching because it won't, not only will it not feel right, but I think you're more likely to lose your balance. It's just going to feel a little odd. So one of the really good things about marching is that it not only requires you to really use your arms, but it also really encourages full flexion of the hip as well as extension of the opposite hip. So, if you're all hunched over and you're trying to do it, you're just going to feel weird. So I don't know that I would call it self-correcting necessarily, but it makes it very clear what your hips are supposed to do. So it is then easy to, kind of turn the dial down and just apply that to your walking. So you have somebody march a bit, maybe forward, backward, whatever it may be, up a hill, something like that. And then just in between, you can toss in other glute exercises. Like, let's say they are having a hard time getting their hip to fully extend. So one of the things you could do, again, put them on their stomach, have them reach behind themselves with the partial lower body segmental roll. If they're ready for bird dogs, that'd be another great thing to have them do before the marching. The one drawback I would say for marching, at least in terms of if you wanted to try to do them right from the outset, is that if people don't really know where their glutes are, what they're supposed to be feeling, they may not figure it out just by doing the marching, because it's faster, it's a more dynamic movement. So slowing it down to the point of no movement, such as with a bird dog or the lower body segmental roll from the stomach, is probably where I would start them. But then to get them to feel the glutes in real time, yeah, you really can't do much better than marching.
As you were talking about that, I just realized that not only is marching, well, it's kind of like a self-corrective posture realignment move. Like I don't recall seeing anybody slouched over marching.
Yeah,
It kind of just corrects their posture. They get upright. They look good if they're able to march.
absolutely. Yeah, no, it's 100% true. Like I have yet to see anybody do it, unless let's say they have pretty serious kyphosis or something like that, and they're just hunched over anyway. You're right. It does just seem to get people to naturally get into the proper position. And I think it's probably the fact that everything has to move the way the body is supposed to move during the gait. So glutes have to kick on, again, provided that people can reasonably access them. You have to be able to swing your arms back, right? There's a whole lot of stuff that's going on in marching. And you don't even have to tell people, keep your chest up, eyes forward. It's like people just kind of fall in line and they just do it.
So if someone, like, they read your article, they're sitting at work all day and they decide that, you know what, I am in the gym. I want to get better at my squats and deadlifts, and I don't want to have lower back pain anymore. So just rolling and doing the bird dogs and maybe marching can really help clean up their movements or in the gym, or help them have access to their glutes to actually develop the power and the strength or express the strength they want to in the gym. Is that right?
Totally, totally. And actually, we've said this before. It would not be a podcast with you and me if I didn't mention Dan John.
Dan John.
Exactly. Dan has always got to be like the guy in the background who always gets mentioned. But he's a big fan of all things original strength. And I know that he said in particular, he really likes marching in between sets of squats. And, I don't know if he really provided like a rationale exactly. He's just mentioned that like his squats get better, his students' squats get better. But 100%, I mean, if you think about it, your entire leg has to work, everything from bottoms of the feet all the way up, to the glutes. But the fact then and the other thing too is, again, like, what is a squat? It's like you maximally bend your knees and your hips, and then you maximally extend your knees and your hips. Well, you're doing both of those things when you're marching. So yeah, without question, I think that if you can get both of those things fired up and make it just kind of like second nature to get the knees and hips to bend and extend the way that they're supposed to, that is just going to be out of the way for when you squat. So it's just going to make them so much easier.
So and because there are people that might be listening that have no interest in going to the gym, lifting weights, or doing any of that stuff. They just want to feel better. Could the movements in your article, which were the bird dog, the lower body segmental rolling, marching, and hill sprints, we could even take hill sprints out of this for the person that really just wants to feel good. Could just those movements alone give them access to their glutes, where their just general day-to-day life would just be better?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is true for any of the original strength resets. Obviously, I don't think it has to be just, the ones that are included in the article. But yeah, I mean, the one that I'll say this, the one reset that everybody wants, like, you don't really have to convince anybody to do, is crawling, because everyone just loves it. It's like, you can feel right from the outset. You're like, dang, I'm getting a lot of work done. I feel really good. So let's say that you've already decided you're going to crawl every day, and I salute you. You definitely don't need a gym for that. In fact, it's probably better you don't do that at the gym, because you're going to garner a lot of stares, and maybe your mental fortitude may not be as strong as your physical fortitude. But what you would definitely benefit from adding would be some of the stuff in the article, for sure. And the other thing too is that, again, even though I love crawling, there are obviously a few missing links in it. So like if all you do is crawl, you're not really gonna be able to activate the glutes the way that you should. You'll get a lot of other muscle. So if you had to add just one more thing, pick like one of the resets from the article and add that into your daily crawling and just watch what happens. You're gonna feel awesome. You're probably gonna look better, and without question, you're gonna perform better.
I do think for the person that just wants to feel better, like if I had to strip one movement out of that whole article, though, I think you're genius with where you started with the lower body segmental roll, because just doing that will help a person find their hamstrings again, will help them find their glutes, and it will start to get rotation in their spine.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be like the biggest, like especially for a sedentary person that just wants to feel better, or even get their way into even thinking about walking or running or doing something healthy. That movement alone, though, may be the key that could just open all the doors.
Totally. Absolutely. I mean, if you're not, that's the other thing you mentioned about, like we just talked about how crawling has a couple of like missing links in it. One of them is obviously the glutes, but rotation is the other thing. It's like spinal rotation is the key for having a really healthy and young spine. So without question, if you wanted to be super minimalist, and I myself am not exactly a minimalist, but if you wanted to be, you could do crawling, and then like you said, the lower body partial segmental rolling. You'd get the rotation back in the spine. You get to feel your hamstrings and your glutes again, and you could just stop there, and you would feel awesome.
Yeah, I don't know how many, and I don't know if you've come across this, but like, so I've done, let's just say I've only done 100 OSAs. The one movement that people don't have access to, that would make everything different, is that lower body roll from their belly.
Yep.
And it is mostly the people that are sedentary and don't get a lot of movement in.
It's weird, actually. I have noticed. I don't know that I've done 100 OSAs, but I've done maybe 99, let's say. And
That's probably fair.
right, yes, exactly. The without question, rolling is always the hardest for everybody. It's very strange because it's like, I mean, people will typically have something they could fix with their breathing and their neck nods and the rocking and the crawling as well. But the number one snag is like that middle movement right there, which is the roll, and especially the segmental roll, like you said. People just don't rotate very much anymore. People don't really know how to use their head. So it's one thing to move your head. It's another thing to get your head to move you, right? Same thing with the legs. Like it's one thing to move the legs. It's a different thing to get your legs to move you. And even though you think you're doing that while you're standing on two legs and you're walking, like I said earlier, so many people when they walk or they run, they're just kind of falling forward and catching themselves. They're not really, propelling themselves forward the way that they should be. So yeah, you watch people do like I always do my very best not to try to let's say pollute what I think is going to happen. So I'll never say anything like, that would make them think that the rolling is going to be hard. Like, okay, what we're going to do now is segmental roll.
Yeah.
And probably like at least 50% of them, if not more, have the most problems with the rolling. No question about it.
So rolling, just that one movement from the article, can fix a lot of good things for a lot of people, sedentary people and people that want to be active. But now let's switch gears just a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and let's go to the people that really want to get after it. Let's go Herschel Walker or Walter Payton style. Your last movement in that article was hill sprints.
Oh yeah.
Tell me about hill sprints and why hill sprints.
Okay, well, first of all, I felt like I had no choice but to include hill sprints in there because I have had the best glute development of my life from doing hill sprints. And it wasn't my intention. I was doing a program last year. It was a 3-month like body transformation program. And I'm just vain. I wanted to look even better. So I was like, I'm going to do this program.
Which is hard to top. I mean, because, you're the hammer.
You would think, but evidently, there was still some room to go. So one of the things that we had to do, it was like for your cardio, you had to do, it was 3 days a week of hill sprints and 2 days a week of just, like a long, like a 20-minute run. And there are a lot more details to it. I'm just giving you kind of like the eagle's eye view. But the hill sprints would increase each week. And so by the end of it, I mean, I was doing like, an absurd amount of 100-meter sprints. And I remember by the end of it I think I turned around and like I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and I was like, dang, I've got a donk. What's going on? My focus was not to try to grow the glutes. It was just a part of the program. And the intention ostensibly was to, improve your conditioning and your endurance and that sort of a thing. But I have never had such noticeable of a change in my glutes than by doing hill sprints.
And you're sure it was the hill sprints because you've done a ton of pistols, a ton of squats, a ton of deadlifts, a ton of swings, but it was you noticed the lumps and the bumps on your rump.
Yeah.
After the hill sprints.
I like that rhyme, the lumps and bumps on your rump. I
was a big fan of Dr. Seuss growing up.
Did a very good job. You could just take over for him, They took a bunch of you took a bunch of great rhyming words and you applied them exactly to what we're talking about. So I think I think that'd be perfect. Yeah, 100%. And this is especially true for this program because it only had one dedicated lower body strength day. I mean, there were some other lower body, things kind of tossed in throughout the week, but it wasn't to the degree, it wasn't anything like outrageously more than what I would normally do. You know what I mean? So like in the finishers, for example, it wasn't, there wasn't a whole ton I'll put it this way. There wasn't a lot of glute centric stuff that I had not already done or had not done a lot more of in previous programs. So it was relatively low in terms of the volume, but the sprinting was the one thing that I was doing. Like again, it was 3 days a week for 3 months, so like 12 weeks. Yeah, without question, it was the hill sprints. So that's what made me really a believer in hill sprints in particular for growing the glutes.
And so I like this too, because you mentioned this in the article. For the person that's thinking, man, I can't run sprints, you did say hill sprints you said, listen, like basically they'll save your joints.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, I don't know if this is the case or not. This is one of those things that's like everybody hears, a particular factoid and then they just repeat it. But my understanding is that with each step you take when you're running, and this is just jogging, for example, it's something like 6 times the weight of your body through all of your lower body joints. And so this is, commonly cited for the importance for strength training if you want to do a lot of running, and then also having good technique so that you're not beating up your joints. But with sprinting, it's something like 10 times the weight of your body through all of your lower body joints with each and every step. So if you think about it, if you are going uphill instead, you're not descending as much, or your leg's not descending as much with each step. So it's going to be a little bit easier on the joints. It's like, if anybody's got sensitive knees or ankles or anything like that, the difference between walking upstairs and walking downstairs is usually pretty pronounced. Like, there are people who've said that when they had bad knees, they had to walk down steps like sideways. They didn't have to do that going up the steps, but they had to do that going down the steps just due to the extra pressure being put through their joints, right? So the same thing is applicable when it comes to sprints. So yeah, I would definitely recommend hill sprints, or if you have access to like a treadmill, just increase the incline and do your sprints like that. There's nothing wrong with sprinting on a flat surface, but I think in terms of like the risk to reward ratio, particularly if you're just getting started with it, probably be better off doing it on an incline.
No, I'm with you. I thought that was brilliant with the hill sprints on the article. I was like, dang it, Aleks, that's perfect.
I wish I could lay claim to that, but again, I think I may have originally heard that from who, Dan John. I think I'm actually not 100% sure, but the rationale makes perfect sense because if you've ever run on a flat surface versus up a hill, you can feel the difference for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. So you've got those 4 movements to build healthy, strong glutes. What else you got?
Well, I would say outside the scope of original strength, like there's some pretty good, let's say, usual suspects in terms of lower body strength movements. So squats, lunges, deadlifts, hip thrusts, things like that. And, if you're on Instagram, eventually you're going to run into one of these booty models who's doing, God knows how many different like banded exercises, stuff like that. I think probably the most important thing to do is just to keep in mind that you want to have like layers to your approach when it comes to your training. So particularly if you are primarily sedentary in your job, like you sit most of the day, you want to make sure that you're maintaining and gaining on your basic abilities. So the original strength resets are going to help you with that. They're going to help you to reconnect with the natural movements of your body. And then from there, you can really add on anything you want. So whether you have aspirations to become like one of these booty models, or you want to participate in a sport or do some strength training, I think you should at least start off with the OS resets. If you are just looking to feel better and you're not all that interested in weight training yet or anything like that, OS resets by themselves are going to be a big help. I would skip the sprinting for now. I would go a little bit easier, start with marching, work your way into skipping and things like that. These are all things that you can learn at an OS certification. Highly recommended for sure. And from there, just start adding in some of the basic glute movements like hinging, squatting, lunging, and things like that. And if you're consistent with it within a few months, you too will be, craning your neck to look in the mirror so that you can see what your derriere looks like.
You may need a full length mirror for that. Is that right?
You might. I mean, you might not even need that. You might not even need to turn that far. Maybe your glutes will have grown so much by that point that you'll be able to see them from the front. That'll be like the ultimate indicator that you've made some improvements.
So I'm just curious, and this is if you had to pick one, just for you, like for you, not somebody else. Like, what's your favorite strength training exercise, like non-OS for the glutes, weight room style?
Probably the hip thrusts, because it's really, really focused strongly on the glutes. Obviously, at the top position, you can get a little bit more tension, I think, than you can with other movements. But even still, I would add in these other movements. I don't think it's good as a standalone. You can use it as a standalone, but I think you'll get more if you've got multiple movements that you're doing. But I do think that the hip thrust is very, very good. But for me personally, if I had to be, and that's for, let's say, strength movements, right? But if you said, okay, any movement at all whatsoever for training the glutes, what would it be? No question, it would be sprinting for sure. Since last year, I've become a believer, and I cannot be disabused of this belief. It is top notch. Again, it's not right for everybody. If you're not ready to sprint, I would not go out and be like, I'm going to do 10 100-meter hill sprints, because you will probably be a hurting unit. But if you can work up to doing those and you can do them safely, the difference is like night and day.
I think the neat thing about sprints, though, if you're into it just a little bit, they're fun.
Yeah.
There's something so freeing about running sprints, even up a hill. It's almost magical.
Especially if you're doing them outside and there's a car driving up the hill next to you.
And you get to race it.
Yes, exactly. You may not win, but you will feel like you were a contender. And that is what really matters.
I do the same thing in the neighborhood, man. I will wait for cars to round the curve down the stretch that I'm running, because it gives me something to compete against. And it is fun.
Oh, yeah. Herschel Walker used to do that. But he's such a beast. He would sprint and try to race trains. So there was a train, I guess, that went like nearby where he would work out into this childhood home, and he would like sprint to try to keep up with it. He probably beat it. Just knowing Herschel Walker. Yeah.
He doesn't fail at anything.
No, he's a madman. Even now, he's like almost 60, and that dude is like a beast beyond belief. I don't know if you've seen any of his pictures. He's just like shredded to the bone.
He's amazing. And we need to talk about him one day. 1,000 push-ups a day, 1,000 squats, 500 pull-ups.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Like, I remember reading a story when he was accepted onto the Georgia State Bulldogs football team. So this is before he hit the big leagues, and he had never bench pressed before in his life. He'd just been doing like an insane amount of push-ups every day practically, as well as like pull-ups and, squats and all, and sprinting and other stuff like this. But he weighed like, I think 222 or 224 pounds or something like that. He benched 375 the first time he ever attempted the bench press. He broke the Georgia State record at the time. And then he went on to bench his body weight for like double digit reps. It was something in the 20s. I don't remember exactly how much it was, but it was incredible. So yeah, people think body weight training is not going to get you very strong. He had a very extreme approach to it, but man,
Well, so everybody loves to talk about the great Gamba doing 1,000 squats a day and so many Hindu push-ups a day.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, but it's no Herschel Walker's no less amazing with his work ethic and the volume that he did too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in many ways, I think he's even more impressive because the Great Gamma was kind of like, he was a big dude, but he didn't look very athletic. Herschel Walker is also a big dude and he looks extremely athletic, even though he's like 58 years old.
Yeah, he looks like Michelangelo carved him straight out of granite.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Herschel was like, you didn't do a good enough job. So he finished carving it out and made himself even more muscular.
I'm not done yet.
Yeah, the dude's an Adonis. I mean, I'm like perennially impressed by this guy.
So guys, if you're listening, we started out by talking about how crack kills and how building a butt can actually help you hold your pants up so they don't fall down and show your crack to everyone.
Correct.
And we landed on Herschel Walker chiseling himself out of granite.
Exactly. That about covers it. I mean, I think that's a pretty good summary if ever there was one.
It does. So we all, and in case you're listening, yes, apparently a frog's butt is watertight. So, ladies and gentlemen,
solved a lot of universally unanswered questions up to this point. So I think that we deserve some credit for that.
We've solved some conundrums today.
Oh, yes.
So guys, thanks so much for listening to Aleks Salkin on the Original Strength Podcast.
See you later, guys.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a great weekend.